Thank you. We're on. Prime time. Listen, this is, although it's a momentous day, it is our first in-person meeting in months. It's been years actually. Yeah. Thank you. It's a pleasure to welcome you members, all of you, the commissioner, former commissioners here, staff, and guests. We do have a few guests here today. Thank you all for being here. We have an agenda. It's not going to be as long as it would appear to be, at least the one I can talk about here. But before I can start the meeting, we've got to make sure that we have a quorum. Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez.
Yeah, calling the roll for the meeting. Chairman Carney.
I'm here.
Member Fernandez-Ketchum.
Here.
Member Freed.
Present.
Member Golden.
Here.
Member Sue. Member Shaw.
Present.
And Member Zarrilli.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. A couple of things I do not say. I've talked to Dan Zarrilli on the phone several times, but this is our first face-to-face meeting. Welcome to the Water Board.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good to have you.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Adam, thank you for joining.
Good morning.
We have the commissioner here today, and as I said, the former commissioner. But we've also got Joe Murin here, and we've got Monty Connors here today. Thank you for being here. The first agenda item, of course, as always, is the approval minutes of last meeting. That meeting was on the 6th of September. June. This is it. You all had a chance to read those minutes. Are there any questions? Are there any corrections? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes?
So moved.
I'll second that.
Thank you very much, Adam. Thank you, John. I think since we're in place, we can actually do a voice vote here. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion passes, and the minutes are approved unanimously. Our next agenda item is a presentation. It will be made by Messrs. Murin and Agarwala. You've got the floor.
I'm ready to.
I was planning.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the Water Board. Today, we'd like to request your consideration of two proposals to bring on consulting services on behalf of the Water Board for the service of DEP and the ratepayers. We have, let's sit down. Yes. So we have, really they fall into two categories, although there are four things that they will do here. The first is we need a strategic plan. DEP is the water utility. There was a strategic plan done a number of years ago. Its focus period concluded. And as I'll go into in a moment, there are a number of increasing and new demands facing the agency and the utility that require some really detailed analysis that particularly with our staffing levels being the way they are, we do not have the ability to do in-house. And I think would really benefit from the kind of expertise that external consultants would bring. And then the other is that, as we all know, we are now in a very different environment of external funding. Between the bipartisan infrastructure law, IJA, the Inflation Reduction Act that was recently passed, we are expecting there to be many billions of dollars available in federal grants to DEP that have not been there for decades. And with the potential that the Environmental Bond Act passes the voters' approval at the state level, that's another $4 billion, which, New York City is half the state. That might be $2 billion that DEP is eligible for. And because DEP has traditionally been so effective at its own financing, the reality is we do not have a deep bench in terms of understanding and applying for and securing this kind of competitive grant. And so we are looking for your support to do these two things. Today I'm hoping that you will agree to take a vote on one. It's been proposed that we hold on the other idea, but I would like to have a discussion on it so that we can perhaps gain your approval at our next meeting. Thanks, Omar. Let's go ahead. I'm now in my 7th month as commissioner, and I think we are, all of us, we're all cognizant of the fact that the post-pandemic world is a different world, but there are some very particular changes that affect DEP. Over the last 20 years, much of what DEP has done, its massive investment program, which, as you know, was very successful in cleaning the harbor and ensuring a high quality of service delivery and doing things like repairing the Delaware Aqueduct, which we expect to complete this year. But those demands were driven by a set of regulatory requirements primarily, and in a low inflation environment. And those two circumstances are not going to be there going forward. There is, of course, the regulatory environment isn't going away, but it's not likely to be driving as much of our capital needs going forward as it has in the past. One of the most important reasons behind that is climate change, right? You all know as well as we do that the storms of the last 15 months have demonstrated that our system is vulnerable, have increased the public's awareness of the risks that New Yorkers face, particularly with stormwater flooding, as we experienced in Ida. I'm sure you all are aware of the fact that we had the cave-in on Radcliffe Avenue in the Bronx, which is our first clear example of climate change actually undermining our asset, right? And that was that case where we had 2 sewer cave-ins on the same stretch, same block, basically. One right after Ida and one the day after a significant but highly localized cloudburst in July. And what we found was that on that one piece of sewer, there was a structural weakness, that the sewer had been there for more than 100 years. It was doing fine, right? And it was perfectly well designed to handle the compression from outside. But the repeated surcharging events that created outward pressure by supercharging the pressure inside the pipe seems to have structurally weakened it. Now, we've looked around. We do not believe that design was used anywhere else. But I think it is the kind of thing that we may learn more about as climate change subjects our assets to pressures that, frankly, we've never seen, and therefore we don't have the intuition to predict. At the same time, we are now in an inflationary environment. We hope, of course, that the macroeconomic environment will stabilize, but post-pandemic supply chain challenges, the war in Ukraine, any number of things are having their early stages of affecting DEP. Inflation is not a major issue for DEP right now, as we discussed it at our last meeting. But we do have to prepare to be in a different environment. And of course, New Yorkers, as they are affected by their water bills, are increasingly affected by inflation. So we have to be aware of that. And then the final thing is that, as many of you know, as members Fried and Zerilli know very personally, this coming April, we will be coming out with the Adams administration's first sustainability plan. And that is always going to be an opportunity for DEP to demonstrate ambition to play its important role in meeting the city's targets. So there will likely be some initiatives that we design in part with what we hope to be the support of the consultants that we are asking for your support on, but also that goal. Let's go to the next one. I won't read this because you can read faster than I can speak, but there is a whole bunch of stuff that we are facing. These are some of the things that we are thinking about. I'll call your attention to the several on the bottom right-hand side around organizational health, which we do have to take very seriously. I'm sure you're well aware of the challenges facing the city workforce. DEP is no exception. We right now have roughly a 17% vacancy rate across the agency. And ensuring that we are using our human resources exactly as effectively as possible has got to be one of our top priorities right now. And that, of course, requires us to be thinking about global best practices. It requires us to be thinking about technology. And it requires us to make sure that we are paying close attention to the efficiency of our operations. So that's an important piece of context. I think our goals, I've said most of the things on the left-hand side here, but we have a set of goals that I don't think anybody in this room would find surprising. I will, again, you can read faster than I can speak, so you can take a look at those, but those are not new. But what we will do, and the idea is to bring on strategy consultant who will deliver a couple of things, and this is what we imagine the phasing to look like. There will certainly be ongoing updates to the water board. There will be formal updates to the water board we are envisioning in the spring or next summer, but that will not be the first that you hear about the work that goes on. I'm a former strategy consultant myself. You find much of the wisdom you need internally, but the value add that consultants traditionally bring that I'm looking for here are, number one, a set of frameworks and an approach that is not what you need in the day-to-day operations of a large organization, but is what a strategy consultant can bring and what we need to answer the kinds of questions around prioritization that we have. I think all of you, when it comes to next spring, when we have to start talking about the water rate for next fiscal year, I'm sure you will want to have a clear understanding of what our capital plan includes, why it includes what it includes, why it does not include more than it includes, and why it is not too big, right? And the kind of framework-based prioritization that I'm hoping we can do with the strategic plan will help us answer those questions. I'm sure you will also be asking us questions around our expenses and asking, is your expense budget as big as it needs to be? Are you underspending in some way, which of course could lead to deferred maintenance and other challenges? Or are you overspending because you haven't discovered opportunities for efficiency? And so one of the key challenges is you see in the middle bucket here is stakeholder outreach and benchmarking. I'm particularly enthusiastic about the prospect to do some wide-ranging benchmarking of DEP's operations. As you see here, again, this will be in service to the water board. I think it will be very helpful to you all as you think about the rate, as you think about the health of the asset that we are managing. And I'll make one final observation, because a number of things here that we believe we will be able to either accelerate or do a better job on does relate to the water rate. And I'm particularly cognizant of conversations that at least were in the 2 water board meetings that I've been commissioner for around questions about stormwater rates and whether this can help accelerate our sustainable rate study, and how DEP assists low-income New Yorkers as the rates are higher and higher given inflation. And I think some external help, and again, the kind of national and global perspective around best practices that other utilities and other similar entities, we don't just have to look at water utilities, we can look at other customer service operations. That kind of perspective, I think, will be really helpful in ensuring that we have truly world-class answers to those kinds of questions. So that's the concept for a strategy. And then Chief Financial Officer will walk you through, Joe has been leading our work to ensure that we are getting as much money from the federal and state governments as possible. And we'll walk you through the other part
Sorry,
of the
I don't know
concept.
if we're open for questions, but my question relates to the first strategic plan. So I don't know if you want me to hold it to the end or talk about it now.
Mr. Chair, let me suggest, if it's okay, let's go through all of it, and then we'll
Yeah,
spend
sure,
as
no
much
problem.
time as you wish on questions.
That was the question.
Okay, so
And yes, so thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Chair, board members. We're also looking to obtain the services of a consultant that would help the agency with grants administration. What we have facing, as the Commissioner laid out, there is an opportunity right now because there's extensive funding that has been authorized by the federal government under the bill BIL. I think the acronyms like bipartisan infrastructure law. Thank you. So we are looking to leverage those fundings. We have, and hold on, let's just go to the next slide, which is the one with the. Yes, this is. So, and what we have here in the package is that suite of funding sources that we're looking to leverage here. On this first slide here, we have those areas where we're already built up, and so we want to make the board aware that we do have the capacity, and we have been leveraging, federal and state resources when they become available. In this instance, there's two large programs that are out there, which is the lead service line replacement program, which is authorized for, I believe it was about $31 billion nationwide. The feds have started to, allocate those funds around. They're going to be administered through the state EFC program and through the State Department of Health. And we are geared up and ready to, move on those ones. So we have no issue with moving on that. The same also with what's also known as State Revolving Fund. This is the mechanism that the Environmental Protection Agency has used over a number of years as a financing tool and also as a means for, making low finance loans available as well as grants available. When, we did it first through the ARRA program back under the Obama administration. So they're looking to do the same now under the Biden administration. So we'll be able to leverage those with our existing capacity. And as you can see, there's significant funding on those, and we expect to get a significant amount of, either financing on those or direct grants on those. Lead service line being specifically direct grants. To the lead service line, I want to be clear though that is a benefit to the system in that it will reduce and eliminate the lead service lines throughout the system, but it's not our assets. So we are working through with the state because those are the homeowners' assets in terms of how we're going to be able to, make that work for everyone, but we expect that should be resolved within the spring, I believe, and that's when the state is expected to start distributing the money and we can start getting, eligible, New Yorkers, and we've already submitted 5 applications into the state for that program. Right now, we're targeting it basically on, medium household income, especially where in economically disadvantaged and EJ communities. So we're really moving quite ahead on that one. Next slide, please, go on. Then what we do have, and I'm going to also maybe pivot a little to Lonzie Conner, Senior Director of Expense and Capital Revenue and Miscellaneous Budget. There are a number of other, funding sources that are coming out of these 2 bills that we're planning to leverage, but here's where we do come up a little short in that these are mainly competitive grants, or they're in areas that we have not really had the expertise in, applying for the grants. There's cybersecurity, energy efficiency, hydroelectric, biofuels, clean vehicles, stormwater. The Adams administration is very, very aggressively pursuing these across all agencies, including DEP, and they've already set up a task force working closely with all agencies through the Deputy Mayor's office, and they've made resources available to those agencies to try and help leverage as much of these grant opportunities as possible. We are looking to supplement those by having this to help us where necessary. We think there's a lot of, specialized things that we do that don't fall into a lot of the buckets. There's a huge amount of money that's coming through for roads and bridges, and, the DOT has always been stood up for that, but we haven't had this opportunity probably since like the 80s, when we were doing some of the plant upgrades. So we really feel, and right now, Lonzi has a team, a limited team, that we have a limitation on our ability to be able to pivot to get all these grants. And we want to leverage as many of them as we can, because here again, to the extent that we can use the resources of this consultant to be able to create, competitive grants that are going to score highly, within the rating system by the various agencies, and where, we have a very good insight into how the EFC works from New York State and how EPA works. A lot of other agencies have a very different, like Department of Energy we're going to be dealing with, Department of Homeland Security. So we want to make sure that we're able to use the resources of a consultant that has that expertise in those fields of being able to, get grants and know how to write them and know what the, the right way is to be able to get the most approval on those. I think there's a few other slides here, but I think that pretty much covers most of it. I'll turn to Lonzi just for a minute if you want to
Yeah.
add it
I
in terms of
think,
what we've done so far.
just supplementing what Joe's saying, if you go to slide 9, I just wanted to identify one bullet. Right, so we go to the right grant application funding. The federal government has really rolled out the benefit cost analyses for each project. So you have to have a positive benefits outweigh the cost. And so think about what we're trying to do. We need energy, we need to do energy, and that's just really what Joe's saying. Energy, we need to do the cybersecurity. Every part of the portfolio of money, alcohol portfolio of money that's being put in place. Because essentially there's $1 trillion in the infrastructure bill and $500 billion for the new IRA bill. So we'd like to access some of the funding. And I think it's a technical expertise that we have. And we need to go out and get some of these. We believe that we can probably pick this up in a few years, 2 to 3 years, as we build our government. So right now we need this to get us moving.
Are there questions for?
Can we just, there was.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought we were done.
It is worthwhile, there is, of course, significant precedent over the years for the Water Board doing this, engage with consultants. There's the Operational Excellence Project that DEP undertook in 2011, calculated to have exceeded a 36% annual return on investment. Some of it was in cost savings, some of it was actually revenue identification. Again, I think that's an example of the kind of thing that bringing in some outside thinking, bringing in some analytical capability that's different from the kind that we normally have in-house. Doing this every year, forever, would be a bad idea, but doing it every now and then can be a very useful investment. And then in terms of the process, we've got so this is just the timeline. We are ready if you approve. We will get RFPs out. We would want to have this consultant on board ideally before the end of the year so that a significant burst of work can be done in the winter and spring.
I think we're ready for questions.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Joe, thank you. Harlan, you have?
Oh yeah, I was just wondering, and it was one of the questions I raised maybe earlier this week, just wanting to sort of understand, so the past strategic plan, and sorry I didn't dig up years and years of approvals, but I don't remember, so are all of the initiatives from the past plan kind of done and dusted? How are we making sure that we're leveraging the money we spent with Veolia and kind of all of the other strategic consultants? I've been on this board a very long time, unfortunately. I'm just making sure that we're not reinventing the wheel and we're really spending well. So I just want to kind of understand, because those last strategic plans, and I've been here since Bloomberg, so I've seen a lot of strategic plans, making sure that every time we're building and making sure that the money we've spent is really accretive for the board.
It's an important question. A couple of observations that I'll make, and Joe and Benny, perhaps you'd like to speak to it. Number one is OpEx was a very specific approach, right? That was not actually, that was a consulting project.
Yep.
It was not a strategic plan the way I think about this, right? That was primarily a cost savings identification opportunity and a revenue generating opportunity. So it was purely fiscal in that respect. I think for this, I think we need to take a broader perspective. As I said, to make sure that we are thinking about our $25 billion capital plan in absolutely the right way in terms of protecting the asset, dealing with climate change, and serving the city. I think there is going to be an operating, as I said, efficiency component to it. I have looked at the results of OpEx. One of the challenges is that data is now a decade old.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
We're a very different agency. Our treatment plants are not the same. It was done before chromic filtration opened. I mean, there's a number of things that I think anybody would say, even if we did want, even if we were asking exactly the same questions that OpEx was asking, we probably need to redo a lot of that work. Anyway, and I will also point out finally that this is a contract that I think is a tenth of the dollar figure that OpEx was. That was a multi-year project. Yeah. The way we've imagined this is that this is a strategy piece. It may identify opportunities and needs where follow-on consulting work would be appropriate, but if so, we would bring that to you all at a later date with a very precise request.
Okay. Arlene?
And if I may add to that too, Commissioner, yeah, there were specific things that were implemented under OpEx, such as, and I'm going to use a rather easy example, and then you can support me in this one, but like such as like changing chemical usage in some of the plants. Yep. So those have all continued to the extent that, as to the Commissioner's point, things are static, but that's where processes have changed, things are, adapting, doing upgrades to the plant as we go along. And there's a lot of stuff that we're going to be looking at over the next 10 years, particularly in the realm of, the capital program, as we look at some of these opportunities out there, both for the federal grants, but also as we move ahead and start thinking about climate change and thinking about how the plants have to be adapted and other areas of operation have to be adapted as well. So those, I think we're building on that. They haven't been diminished or dissipated away. And I think, the one big one that we had too was on the meters. And we think there's a lot of, separate from this, but there's a lot of, efficiencies that we could be further getting from that area. And that's a whole other, area of conversation. And at some point, probably Deputy Commissioner Lynch will be coming down and talking about those opportunities out on the revenue side in terms of better collection methods and, doing meter replacements on an even larger scale for some of across the agency.
Got it.
I know, Vinny, if you want to add anything or if anyone has anything. Vinny was interested.
No, I was going to say, just to the Commissioner's point about how things have changed, our strategic plan, and again, going back 10 or 12 years of iterations of plans, but was focused a lot on the heavy regulatory requirements that we were seeing for drinking water, for wastewater, for health and safety. There were a lot of focus on that and how to deliver those cost effectively. And now, as the Commissioner said, our regulators have realized, climate change, aging infrastructure are the things we should be focusing on. And that's moving forward what we want.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks. Adam, please.
Yeah, thank you. 2 comments and 2 questions. So maybe I'll throw the comments out first and then ask the questions. First, just wanted to note my strong support for both of these studies. I think they're absolutely critical. Unprecedented time for federal funding, and it is an absolute mess to try to navigate it. And the funding opportunities are announced before the guidelines on how to apply and what they are, and you want to not have to play constant catch up for it. And it is an unprecedented opportunity to get hundreds of millions of dollars to support our system and accelerate our capital plan without having to hoist all of that responsibility onto the ratepayer. So anything we can do to do this, I think, is absolutely critical. And I apologize for emailing. I just sent you, Joe. We've launched a local infrastructure hub at Bloomberg Philanthropies and an E3-on-1 to help cities navigate all of the federal funding opportunities. We have a webinar on BRIC next week with the FEMA officials and HUD. And I sent you some resources around the non-water ones that I urge you to look at, and happy to do an offline conversation with DEP. It's been directed towards kind of OMBs and mayors, but we've had some city agencies. I think the scale of DEP is equal to many of the cities that have been attending, so happy to walk you through that and make sure all of that's available to you. And I also think the strategic plan is critically important. We just completed a survey of different citywide surface water flood plans for work I'm doing in London, and that clear and transparent prioritization of why you're taking actions and investments, what the need is, has been absolutely critical for the cities to actually target their finite resources, but also to build confidence from the public and get shareholders, stakeholders involved, and have the public understand securing against intense rainfall is a 20 to 30 to 40 year program, and this is where and how we're starting. So I think this is going to be incredibly important for the city, for the system, and for the ratepayers as well. And the only thing I'd urge is the earlier you can come to us ahead of the rate hearing and the proposal process, the more engaged we can be and help shape it around what's happening with the plan, but absolutely critical. So my two questions. One, you've talked about a lot of the challenges longer term for the system. I know in the past we've spent a lot of time talking about arrears and ways of accelerating repayment on that, the challenge we face. Just wondering how that may fit in to what you're doing, knowing that's a shorter term challenge, but one that is clearly in our mind and for the bondholders, and as we think about future issuances, what that may impact. And then the second, you talked about climate change and the unprecedented impacts we've had in the past 15 months. Just wondering if that's something that is wholly within the strategic plan, or you'd want to do even more intense study around the pressures the system is facing, given the unprecedented nature of the storms, not only the hurricanes, but was it 2 weeks ago that you had 0.1 inches of rain in Central Park and 2 inches of rain at LaGuardia. We've never faced storms that have that differential between the system and how you plan around that. So just curious how that falls into either the strategic plan or something else we should be thinking about.
I'll defer. Let me, thanks, Adam. I'll take those in reverse order. I think exactly to your point about stormwater, and we see this. In fact, we've had a number. Basically, every single conversation I have with an elected official that isn't about the Reese houses has been about stormwater, right? And I will just, as a side note, one of the things we have to do also is ensure that we are not rushing to invest in stormwater and forgetting about some of the other challenges, right? And climate change has impacts on the Delaware River Valley and will have impacts on the way we share water with New Jersey and Pennsylvania. I mean, there is a lot connected here. But we also, part of this, to my mind, is ensuring that we can clearly articulate what we are doing in our traditional kind of capital plan of ensuring the long-term viability of our historic assets and increasing redundancy and reliability and all of that. But when it comes to stormwater, there's no question that I think this approach would help us develop that framework for how we think about stormwater investments alongside resilience and redundant water supply and all the various things we have to do. There is a lot more work that we would need to do beyond this to do a full stormwater plan. As you might imagine, we have a lot of work going on internally right now, and with some of our existing engineering consultants. Along those lines, you may know that we brought on Eric Sanderson, the noted historical geologist from the Wildlife Conservation Society, the author of the book Mannahatta. He's helping us understand historical water courses in New York City and overlaying them on our flood maps, because that's a likely indicator of places that will be well nigh impossible to protect from flooding over the long term, and offers us, for example, a template of where we might do a citywide strategy for locating bluebells. Right? The engineering work for how you would roll that out, I think, is a question mark for us in terms of whether we right now have the capacity to do all of that. So I guess my answer is, at the highest level, I think we will achieve a prioritization through this study. I think if you are interested, we would be happy to give you a report at the next meeting on the way we are thinking about stormwater and some of the work that's ongoing, and maybe at that point we can talk about whatever gaps be emerging, but I will say it is something, most of Tasos's team is thinking about this stuff constantly. Angela's team is thinking about this stuff constantly. We've got a lot of work going on, so we'll come back to you. On AR, I think you're right. I don't think this really relates to accounts receivable, except insofar as thinking about kind of things that are truly about 2 to 5 years from now, and that I know, Anzarelli had voiced concern about things like the program we have for low-income ratepayers. And as I said, I would like this to set us up in conjunction with the sustainable rate study so that we have a really thoughtful approach to doing that over many years. And if we do that, that should bring down AR over the long term. It will not be the way we address the current issues in AR. That actually merits a very different conversation. We'd be happy also, of course, to share our thinking on how we're going to reduce it. There is some early good news, but as you saw in the meeting last May when you looked at the financials, like the pandemic did cause a significant increase in our overall AR. Joe, anything, or Monty, anything to add?
No, I think the only thing I would add, Commissioner, is that we are, looking at this and, working closely here with OMB, also with Department of Finance, as we think about, the lien sale, which is always an issue out there as well as thinking about other alternative strategies for AR. And, we have, with, Deputy Commissioner Lynch has been going through that, and it was probably our intent, I would say, in the next, 2 months or so, that we would probably be maybe bringing something to the board to start thinking about it from there. I don't want to give an exact date, so I'll defer to the commissioner on that. I don't want to.
We can work with you and the chair to figure out the right date. But I will say.
Let's talk about it.
Okay. Rest assured, it's something we are working on. We've got a number of initiatives, not just waiting for the lien sale, going on right now.
Well, the terminology I heard recently in London as they think about these storms is water bombs, which is just because a small neighborhood, one borough gets absolutely deluged, the other's perfectly fine, and they just don't know where it's going to drop. So the challenge that you face in the system that has never had to plan for this or think about such localized extreme events is really incredible.
John?
I have an ignorance question. Apologies, I've never hired a strategic planner. I just kind of look at the depth and breadth of this. Is this going to, and not the grant writing one, that makes complete sense to me. You get somebody who writes really well, I get that one. It just seems to cover a lot of different areas. So is it going to be one consultant, or is it going to be kind of people with expertise in each of these areas? Because organizational health is a completely different, at least in my mind and part of my ignorance, from capital improvement and climate change addressing. So just sort of want to understand, as you put out the RFP, is it multiple consultants or is it one?
So it could wind up being multiple, but what I think we will want to do one contract.
Got it.
And so, as is often the case, there may well be firms that form a consortium to respond to the RFP. However, the way we've imagined this, I know there are many consulting firms that I think would be qualified to do the full range of this. We should remember, we're not asking anybody to do engineering, that this is strategy.
No, I understand. You're saying look at it and tell us where we can get help. But I guess when I think about, I sell bonds, right? So I don't know what Adam knows and Adam doesn't know what I know. So that's sort of, it's my very limited scope of
many of
my experiences.
The strategy consulting firms, they will have multiple practices.
Got it.
And you will get some people for part of it, but the part of the value they bring is across those different practices, they will have a consistent approach to language and a consistent approach to analysis. They'll be able to be managed by one person or one team inside that firm, so we are not trying to manage 3 or 4 different providers, and that can be really helpful.
So the universe of people that we're talking to is very small, right? The universe of people that you can kind of get RFPs for to kind of cover this breadth and depth would be pretty limited,
come up with a list
right?
of maybe 15 firms or something that was on our initial list of firms that we would send this out to, as well as, of course, post it. And by the way, we are cognizant of meeting our MWBE goals as well, and that's hopefully going to be part of both of these.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that isn't where I was going. I was just
No,
trying to
I
understand.
don't mean that. As I think about it,
Yeah,
that is going to be part of our contract.
Got it.
I just wanted to thank you, Commissioner, and the staff for being forward-looking and recognizing that we're at this pun intended watershed moment and grabbing the opportunity to try and obtain more of the federal funding that's available. I did just want to mention 2 points that I think are important about this request that are contained in the materials, but didn't necessarily rise to the top when I was looking at it. One is, and which I thank the staff for clarifying with me. One is that although this is a DEP strategic plan, and there is a tremendous amount of overlap between the needs of DEP and the water system, given that DEP manages the water system, there will be an accounting for DEP activities that are not water related, and the time that's billed by consultants for matters that relate to other areas within the DEP ambit, like noise pollution or air pollution, that will not be coming out of pockets of ratepayers, which I think is important, because obviously I'm supportive of this concept across the board in terms of DEP's mandate, but of course we are stewards for the water system funds, and so I'm glad to see that that's going to be taken care of. And then the second point that I wanted to make was that my understanding is that the amounts that are being requested are caps, and that when we're going to put this out for bidding, that one of the factors that will be taken into account is pricing, and therefore if a firm can do this work for cheaper, we're not saying that they have to charge what our cap is, and they will get points, as it were, in the evaluation process if they come in cheaper. And I just say that because it seemed as if the numbers, when you do this kind of exercise, you have to budget for it. The numbers are sort of arbitrary until you put it out into the market and see what the market can bear. But it just struck me as worth underscoring that this is not necessarily, these are not necessarily the amounts we're going to spend, these are the caps. And so I think that that's an important element of it too. So thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Yes, Evelyn.
Yes, good morning, and thank you. I believe in strategic planning. I think that's great. Saying thank you for the forward thinking. In terms of the grants, for particularly the grants that we're planning to go for, does the timeline, particularly for the competitive grants, align with the deadlines for those grants that we foresee coming?
So let me
Go ahead.
to that. So the new word is the NOFO. So everyone, NOFO, what is the Notice of Funding Opportunity? And as Board Member Fried said, there's this whole maze of things happening. So we wait on NOFOs, and there's a federal website called grants.gov, and that brings out the NOFOs. So we're really looking at NOFOs, and as you can see, the whole bundled funding that's in there, we don't know what's coming out of it, and it really has to do with the NOFOs. So it's not an easy question to answer, but we are on top of it, and we're trying to figure out when these things are coming out. Sometimes they give us like a notification, it's going to be coming out soon, so it gives us a point to start, and we're looking really to be ready for that.
And Monty, can I add one?
Sure, go ahead.
Some of these are annual appropriations, right? So there'll be no votes by year. So
Right, I'm speaking about the competitive grants, and that's where the level of expertise is not. We're okay with the annual things that we do, but it's competitive items that really have the deadlines and really have, the federal government's going to give you monies and grants for something that's new and innovative. They're not going to give you money for your operating costs, so we really have to be responsive to those things.
But I guess perhaps the most straightforward answer to your question is we need this as soon as possible.
Right, no, I mean, as we're speaking, probably a NOFA is coming out for one of these grants, so that's why I'm trying to think,
So
We're in a rush. No,
Yeah.
And I think, Evelyn, too, we're trying to, one of the things, like we just had a meeting yesterday with the Deputy Mayor's Task Force on the infrastructure management, And, they have established what's called an Airtable, which tracks all of these grants, when they're coming out, what all the deadlines are. So there's already, infrastructure built in so that we know when they're coming in. They're being very diligent in saying, you have X number of weeks before you can, that you need to get this grant ready. If you think you're going to apply for it. And as I think as I may have told the chair or John, they've got their own consultant on board as well that's assisting them with managing this process too. So we're seeing that we're going to be working hand in glove with them on making sure that we're prepared before them, because it's not like you just slap it together, as you well know, the day before. But this is like, we want to be at least 2 to 3 months, ahead of it, so that you can have that vetting go through and make sure that you're, and there's a lot of them you know an idea of when the NOFO, as Lonzy said, is going to come out, so you can be preparing for it. Some of the uncertainty, revolves around what are the criteria going to be, how is the government, how is the federal government going to be exploring these things, and some of that stuff is still in process, like the ones we're doing right now on the lead service lines. The state is still, like I had said, they're still figuring out how they're going to be able to make this work, because they may have to actually pass legislation enabling, the state and the municipalities to be able to use these federal funds on, private infrastructure. So that's a problem we have statewide. So they're well aware of it. They were supposed to get it through legislation in the spring. But those are things that we're all trying to anticipate. Our intergov people are on top of this. OMB is on top of it. So we're all, and what we're really looking to be able to have this, the administration grant for us to be able to help keep us on top of it as well, so that we don't fall behind, particularly to Lonzy's point about doing the benefit cost analysis, and if there's environmental review stuff that has to happen, because we usually rely on our own engineering staff, but we've got so short-staffed right now, that's where we're probably going to struggle a little bit as well.
So I was going to ask, if there was a proposal that was due in 2 months, now do you have some capacity at all right now to, let's say, respond to an NOFO if it came out in the next 2 months?
We would have to pull staff like that. We use all the experts, so I'm not an engineer, so we'll find someone who's a stormwater engineer. So we do have sections, and they're the ones that are going to spearhead that. We actually are just the grant administration aspect of it, not the grant creation, and that's really what we're trying to build into.
And you want the staff to be involved, because bringing in, I have experience in grants, you actually don't want to hand it off, because they're not going to be able to speak to the,
Exactly.
respond to the proposal.
Let me be clear, this is not for people to come up with ideas
Right, okay.
that, conform to a grant, but the DEP hasn't been thinking of. Right, but a couple of examples of the kinds of gaps that we see. The U.S. Department of Transportation, one of the interesting things about the bipartisan infrastructure law is, in part with climate change in mind, it's thinking about water impacts as they relate to transportation. As you know, DEP manages a number of roads in the watershed. New York City DOT has for decades done all of the kind of cost-benefit analysis work that US DOT requires as part of a highway group. DEP does not know how to do that, right? So in an example like that, if we saw a NOFO and we thought, oh wow, that could relate to some capital needs on some of our watershed roads, we might have our internal justification, but it might not meet the US DOT standard. And there might be an approach that somebody who's done that for many years could do very quickly that would take us a very long time to learn, right? It's not that a consultant would say, oh, why don't you build a road here or something, like that's not the thing we're going to be doing. But there is also then a screening process for what agencies mean when they, there's a certain amount of horse whispering, right, with the way some of these NOFOs are written. And part of what we are enthusiastic about, some of what's already going on with the Deputy Mayor of Operations Task Force that Joe participates for us in, is trying to match, okay, if we look at all of the needs within DEP, and of course for DMO, it's all the needs within city government, which ones are most likely to score positively when they're reviewed, because of course those are the proposals we want to put together, and that's also some of the expertise that we won't necessarily have. We know what we need most, we don't know what necessarily will appeal best to the Department of Energy, the Department of Transportation. agencies that we are not accustomed to.
And also to add to supplement what you're saying is essentially, how could we not necessarily tailor, but look at a particular grant and say, oh, we can use that if we just do it this way. Like Chris said, we go forward, we're moving forward, and that's our daily, we treat the water, we bring the water in, we treat it. But there could be things in energy that we're not quite familiar with that someone can give us an approach to do it and really give us access to the funds.
My last question, the ones from legislation, and I'm probably one of the new, second to newest board member, forgive my naiveness, but who advocates for those? Like if those monies already appropriated, is it likely that we're going to get the amount that you anticipate?
And that could be a mixed bag, because we
Yeah.
do have some that where they're specific to maybe the congressional delegation for the city, and we've been having those conversations already, so you may have a leg up on some of those. So that gives an added emphasis to it. Others are just straightforward, straight up competitive, and there's going to be scoring and ranking, and those are, I think, Lonzi's very familiar with on the drinking water side. They have, over the years, looked very closely at the technology that you're using to deliver drinking water. In terms of, are you using like microfiltration? The UV plant is a perfect example of that, where we have not a lot, compared to the cost of it, which was well over $1 billion. But we got, through the state grant program, tens of millions of dollars that was funded for the UV plant, because it was a new, innovative process for, cleaning, treating drinking water. So those are the kinds of things that we've been scaled on a very small level over the years to be able to leverage those grants. The magnitude of what we're looking here, we could get to the stuff that we already have lined up, such as SRF, but the other ones, we really just need that assistance to be able to keep it laser focused and able to get, the right write-up, be able to hit all the right marks, make sure it's going to score well, and be able to know that it's going to be competitive. And to the commissioner's point also, there may be things that, on the administrative side, across the Adams administration, say, you know what, we're really going to target a particular, program for DOT on this, because it makes a lot more sense, and that's where the need is. It's not that they're going to diminish our needs, but it's like they're going to look at it too as like, where is this going to best serve, what the needs are, across the city. Some of our things are just not going to fall in these other buckets, like such as the DOT funding, but there's a lot of things where we probably will be partnering with them, such as where is like permeable pavement, and they are looking at a lot of these resiliency measures as being incorporated, and it's going to help them score higher. So that's going to help us over time as well in making the system stronger also.
And then we anticipate in a few years, I don't know how few, there will be some level of knowledge transfer. So as we move forward, we can do the benefit cost analysis. We can do a lot more to grant writing. The pool of funds that just came up to kind of change the entire way that we have to look at things. We have to look at a lot of funds. Before, like I said, we were moving forward doing the SRF program.
John? One other question I had about the grant writing consulting project. Do we have a bogey that we have in place that we can use to judge the success of this kind of a project? Do we look at the city's proportion of the population relative to the national population and then figure that's the proportion of available funds we should get? How do we think about what a success or failure or neutral outcome looks like here?
That's a really good question. Certainly at the highest level, just kind of, are we getting our fair share, right, is a good way to judge ourselves. It's a case, frankly, we've begun to make to the state in terms of New York State has not traditionally recognized that as 50% of the population and 62% of the tax revenues in New York State, that somehow those are relevant numbers when they give away money. But I think part of what we will want to do, though, because of course there are going to be things that DEP is ineligible for or marginally, and so it's that side by side that Lindsay was talking about. So I don't have a clear number. I think that on the other side, the easiest one is just, is there a return on investment, right? As we look back 2 years from now, and we've gotten grants that we probably wouldn't have applied for or known to apply for in excess of what we paid, and that's like the bare minimum, right? And then I think we'll have a better sense as time goes by of what our ability is.
And I would imagine that one could do a much more sophisticated analysis where you look at the appropriations and see not just the total amount, but how much of it is geared towards urban areas versus rural areas. So, I didn't mean to be overly simplistic about it, but I figured we should have some way of figuring out whether it's a success.
A very good example, with the lead service line money, the congressional, or the formula that EPA used to allocate that national allocation across the states had nothing to do with the presence of lead service lines. And so a number of advocacy organizations are now going to EPA saying in future years, while it's a competitive grant, it will be an annual competitive grant. You've got to rejigger your formula to actually take into account which states have the most lead service lines.
Thank you.
And there was also, just to add to what the Commissioner said, there are allocations that are based on those two criteria, whether it's an urban environment or a rural environment. And that's where we've already started to think, a little more creatively, because, we have a very large operations that are in a rural environment in our watershed. So we've already started exploring opportunities, and this is where we think the grant, the consultant will be able to help us, partnering with our upstate, either municipalities, county, so that we could be able to leverage some of those funds that might score higher because it's not in, the 5 boroughs, but we could be able to leverage it for our upstate assets, or to be able to offload things that they might have turned to us for, that we could say, well, let's get the federal money to pay for this.
That's great.
And I would just temper our expectations of how effective, just, again, thinking through the resilience and BRIC funding that recently was announced. It's billions of dollars, yet when you start parsing it out, this chunk is only available for 15 coastal states, this chunk is only available for rural areas, this chunk has to go through the Justice 40 criteria. So even looking at population, that may work for 2 or 3 of the 50 grant things we're looking at, and some of it is much more arbitrary, or goes to the state, so it doesn't come to anything around how effective we were, as opposed to how effective we were at lobbying the state to get our fair share, or how we would define that. So, I would put our baseline at that bogey of, have we gotten an exponential amount more than we spent to get this? But for this, where we've gotten the money, I think gets to be really, really complicated. But a good accounting to be able to try to track and think about.
Yeah, thank you. I want to appreciate the thoroughness of all this. I think it's really helpful information for the board to be considering, and wholeheartedly support the need for strategic planning. I think it's as we're looking ahead and we laid out all the challenges, I think it's critical that we do this. And I appreciate your focus, in particular, Commissioner, on the affordability question that will continue to be sort of, a challenge for many New Yorkers. I was curious if you could add a little bit more color, maybe to the time frame on the strategic planning, and how, I guess, what you expect to have available when, to be able to inform the April 23 sustainability plan, next, I guess, June's rate consideration, and then how much, what's the total, when do we think this will all finish up in terms of a plan? I think it's one set of things. And then the other, I guess, is related to the sustainability plan is, the strategic plan for DEP implicates a lot of other agencies. And probably that's within the sustainability plan to think about how is it redesigning roads with DOT? How are other agencies participating in this, and issues that overlap?
So I'll answer the second one first. I think the strategic plan that we've come to you for, I think, is going to be very focused on DEP and almost exclusively on water. But there may be, as you say, some things that implicate other agencies. In a couple of cases, we are already well along in conversations with partner agencies as part of the Plan YC process that we're engaged in, or the sustainability planning process that we're engaged in. But I think it is going to be important for us to keep tight control of this one. And also make sure that we don't, interagency stuff is a lot of fun, and that's where a lot of the big ideas are necessarily going to be. We've got a vast operation, right? And we've got to make sure that we never lose sight of that. So I think this one is going to be fairly tight. I think, given the timing here, I think, it is reasonable to expect that we have some information next spring that can inform both the sustainability plan and next year's rate case. As you saw, it's not clear by any stretch that we will be done. So I think what we will probably be able to do is offer some work in progress. For example, around benchmarking and some other things that may be helpful as you think about next year's rate, but really think about this as a strategic plan that will be fully in effect the following.
Thank you.
I think it's just realistic.
I'm not sure if I caught this, maybe you said this. Why aren't we moving forward with the funding RFP at this meeting?
I think that's up to the board.
So it's...
Yeah, it is my view that even I need to know some things about the funding proposal that I'd like to talk to the commissioner about and to Joe about privately.
Understood. Okay. No, I wasn't clear on that piece. And and I wanted to just, maybe this is a point, maybe this is a question, maybe this is a comment. I think you have a lot of really interesting expertise here on the board, and the role of the board throughout this year on the strategic planning process. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on how you want to take advantage of that, whether it's, I know there's report outs at the meetings, but there may be other ways to engage the expertise on the board, and I would certainly, I can't speak for anyone else here on the board, but I would certainly be happy to participate in any process or meetings or conversations that could be helpful to the agency.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions before I ask if you would mind?
One last
Please.
thing. So, will there be, Jonathan, to your point in terms of the cap? So, let's say for the strategic plan, the list of 15, will there be an RFP coming out from us, or some letter of intent that they'll respond in? Will we get to see sort of the comparisons of the consultants through the bid process, if appropriate?
May I?
Sure. Yeah.
The distinction that I make between managing and governing
Okay.
is
Got it.
one that for me is very real and very clear. To the extent that staff wants to keep us advised, to the extent that they choose to let us know what's going on, the commissioners committed to doing that. Soft reports, particularly with regard to the strategic plan. But if we can, I mean, I understand your point, and I take it seriously, but with the board's okay, I'd like not to have them come in and make formal reports until they're ready to do it. It seems to me fair.
Understood. Thank you.
No, of course. First of all, I'll join with everybody else. I'm very enthusiastic about both of these presentations, about the plans that staff has created to get these two very, well, I guess they come together at some point, but they're very different proposals. You just made the point, Commissioner, that this is a vast organization. I have no concept of how a strategic planner comes in here, decides on precisely what you need to know and what the staff needs to know, and then implements to create a plan. I can't wait to see that. How many employees does DEP have that are water related? I've never asked a question that way before.
Generally, John and I had this conversation. The breakout is about 85% are pure water utility.
Okay.
10%.
How many is that? Joe? I mean,
That's about, so we have about 5,000 people.
Okay.
So, 4 or 5 times 850, 40,000.
Oh, look at that mental math. Look at that mental math around it.
So 4,300-ish. That's what I say, 4,300.
But it also came from back here. I love mental math.
Thank you, Marley. And then there's 10%, which is called Interfund Agreement, which are those individuals that work on capital projects, and thus their time can be charged to the capital program. So there's still water utility employees in the sense they're working on water and wastewater,
sure.
but they're capital charged. So that's where they get separately funded via that way. Then there's about, I'd say anywhere from 2 to 5% that are what we call tax levied. Those cover environmental compliance, areas such as the air and noise, hazmat, Monty helped me out here too. Asbestos, thank you. So those things that are, environmental related in the remit of what DEP does, but they're not, charges of the water system has to take care of.
I've never read a strategic plan that did not have big human capital and human capital management section in it. Do we expect to have our strategic planners give us a better sense of whether we are right-sized with regard to employment and a sense of where we may not be, in which event we would need to right-size?
I think that's exactly that's an excellent example of the kind of thing that some benchmarking would help us with.
Sure.
Right. And oftentimes, and this is where it can be, a good strategic plan is often one of following the story, right, as you go. And so the way I would imagine some of this to start is that we would have a consultant do some relatively high-level benchmarking, and then where you see things that are interesting, you start double-clicking to get more and more detailed analysis, right? And things where there doesn't seem to be a story, you don't need to investigate much farther, right? So there's some judgment there. So I think, frankly, Mr. Chairman, it will depend on what we find.
Sure.
It may come in and say, by these 4 metrics, you're roughly right, and then there's not much of a story. It may be, you're way out of line on these things, you're way different on these things, and let's understand why. Of course, it could mean that we're just a different operation, right? A groundwater system and a surface system are going to be different, right? A filtered system and an unfiltered system are going to be different. But it may be that there are things we can learn.
Well, let's hope so.
I hope so.
With regard to managing human capital, Loncie, you were talking earlier about the size of your staff. And I will say on the record that if we are lucky enough to get the size grants that Joe talked about, you're going, and this is, I'm not trying to manage your department, I'm really not, but holler when the time comes for you to both begin to write grants based on billions of dollars worth of available funds. Just holler.
Definitely will.
All right. Are there any other questions? Then we have a resolution to vote. It is the resolution approving the strategic plan. Fine idea. Are there questions about the resolution?
Only one. I think as I read the resolution, this is authorizing the solicitation and negotiation. Does that mean that you will come back with a selected negotiated contract for approval, or is that meant to be in this approval as well?
I think what we're giving staff is an opportunity to negotiate and approve a contract.
Is that what this
I think
says?
staff is correct.
That's correct. This resolution would provide all the negotiation process approvals and authorize the budget up to the cap to conduct the process inside the contract.
Okay, that was my question.
That's what I assumed. Are there any other questions about the resolution? Hearing none, please, may I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Arlene. Is there a second?
Second.
Adam, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? And the resolution passes unanimously. Mr. Commissioner, we will come back to you. Let's talk. I do have some questions, but and others who may have questions of Joseph or the Commissioner, please do not hesitate to call them. Did I do that well?
I adore you.
All right. We will hope and expect that we will have the second resolution on the agenda. Thank you, sir. Is there any other business to come before this board?
I just want to say publicly that if you look at what's happening in Mississippi, I really just want to thank the people around the room for making sure that the system stays with tons of integrity and it is not based on socioeconomic status. So I know that people in this room get beat up a lot by me. But I just want to say, they do. But I do want to just say, I mean, as you like look at it and read it every day, and it's important that it's on the record. I think it is important that New Yorkers recognize the investment that's made that is not delineated by your political ideology or your socioeconomic status. So to me, I've been on this board a very long time because I find this agency to be one that's apolitical and just does an amazing job in city and upstate. And I just want to publicly say that I've been here over a decade, 3 mayors, and this is my third, yep. And I just want to say that hats off to the agency for being first in class. So that's it.
Member Shaw, thank you very much for that very thoughtful comment. As I don't hear any other business, may I have a motion, please, to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you very much, Dan. Did you second? Thank you. Dr. Fernandez-Ketchum, thank you. See, there's somebody else. Oh, David, I just wanted to thank you for joining us today. This is the Executive Director of the Board of Finance. Yeah. All right. It has been moved and seconded that we adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Are there any opposed?